Welcome into the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is the podcast where we talk to grandfathers, adult grandchildren, and experts in areas of importance to grandfathers. Whether you're a new grandfather, a seasoned pro, or somebody interested in learning about relationships, this is the place for you. So come on in, join us as we learn together, laugh together, and support each other on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. Cynthia Kane is a board-certified licensed genetic counselor with over 25 years of clinical experience. She is the founder of It's Their Turn. And what Cynthia has transitioned into is providing counseling, education, and support for grandparents, particularly grandparents who provide care for their grandchildren. What she is passionate about is making sure that new parents and new grandparents get on the same page when it comes to raising the grandchildren. It's important that everybody has the same expectations in terms of care, in terms of all the fun activities that grandparents can do, so that we can make sure that we try to avoid any of the missteps, the miscues, the miscommunication that can sometimes go on in our hectic lives. You are absolutely going to love how she works with our good friend Dee Dee Moore over at More Than Grand, providing an advice column, as well as a number of resources that are available on her website. I'm going to put links to her website so that after this conversation, you can get to know Cynthia and what she does even a little bit more. Before we get started, I want to remind you that Google Podcast app is going away and changing quite a bit come April 2nd. So I think Google is trying to move over and push everything to YouTube. But I wanted to make sure that you guys have plenty of heads up, so you still have a few weeks to find a new home to listen to your favorite podcast. And without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with Cynthia. Hi, Cynthia. Welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I'm excited to have this conversation with you and learn more about all the communications and even some of the sticky points that come up with parents and grandparents.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to be here.
It was interesting starting to get to know you and starting to get to know your background. I wanted to learn more about how you were drawn into helping grandparents and families around grandparenting when the background was as a genetic counselor.
Yeah, and even today, many people don't know what genetic counselors are, and there are only a few thousand genetic counselors in the country, but we're trained in a specific way. We work with families in medical centers where families are referred for either hereditary disorders in their family and also commonly pediatric and prenatal issues. So genetic counselors, have a background in medical problems, health problems, but they're also very strongly trained in interpersonal counseling and helping families cope with these kinds of things. So when I retired, it was kind of a natural process to move towards another aspect of counseling families.
Oh, sure. I would imagine it's not a night and day change for you because you do have to go in and talk about sometimes probably uncomfortable conversations and topics, and then other times it's a lot of fun. It's, hey, here's a bunch of opportunities. Here's what's going to happen.
Right, exactly. And once I was a grandmother, I just was naturally drawn to saying, hey, I could use these kinds of support systems as a new grandmother, and it made perfect sense to me that others would like it too. And there wasn't as much out there as I would have liked. Yes.
That's actually one of the reasons I started this podcast is I was looking around as a new grandpa going, hey, wait a second. There's, grandpas are the butt of jokes and shows and books and things. And individually, that's fine. But looking for resources around and for grandfathers was a little bit difficult. So it was like, okay, well, let me stake out this little corner of the world and do my contribution.
I bet. And it is quite a contribution, really. That's great.
Well, thank you. With grandparenting and grandparenting counseling, that's a very large topic, are there more focused in specialties that you talk about with, grandparents and new parents?
Yeah, so there are some new grandparent classes that are available through your medical center, your local hospital. Those are great for addressing the kinds of information that new grandparents need about pediatric recommendations on safety, nutrition, and back to sleep. And those things are really important to help new grandparents kind of get their footing. What I found after a couple of years as a grandmother was that there were many grandparents, mostly grandmothers out there that were doing a substantial amount of childcare for their grandchildren. Many of them were having sort of similar kinds of problems that I was hearing from grandparents, and I was also hearing some things from my daughter-in-law and my son about conflicts that their friends were having with with their own parents. So I felt like an important place to offer counseling was for those particular grandparents that were in a caregiving role, not a custodial caregiving, not grand families, because I didn't have enough experience to work with those families, but families where grandparents are just providing regular childcare. There were classic things that tended to come up, and I felt like I had something to offer those families.
Now, I've got to wonder too, because I think it's also a little stereotype, and I go back to, I don't even know how long ago this was, right? Everybody Loves Raymond, that very popular show, right? And yes. Of course, the mother-in-law knows how to raise grandchildren. And the grandma knows how to, right? Because if she didn't, the grandchildren wouldn't be here.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that some of the procedures, some of the science, some of the ways of doing things tend to change. And I suspect that we've got a lot of grandmothers and grandpas that are very much still like, hey, this worked for me 30 years ago, or this worked for me 40 years ago. This is still how I'm going to approach things. And the parents may be working off of a different user manual, let's say, than
Absolutely.
What they grew up on.
Well, to use that analogy, there's a system update that's needed for sure. So one of the things that I find is that grandparents need to feel that they have a place in the family and that they have a value. They want their grandchildren to know them. They want to know their grandchildren, and they do feel that they have something to offer. However, as we know, things have really changed in the last 40 years, and many of the things that were perfectly fine and worked pretty well decades ago simply just don't apply anymore. Either they're philosophical and sort of worldview perspectives that are no longer accepted. And some things are just new information about medical issues, safety issues, and certainly mental health issues. There are things that many grandparents today in their 60s and 70s really had no education about. And they need to get updated. And the young families, I think the young parents do struggle with trying to educate their own parents on the things that are important values for them today. Doing that, but doing it with respect and love. And so these are some of the struggles that the grandparents are having and the young families are having.
Oh, sure. And I can just imagine too that, for example, with me being distant to the grandkids, and I only see them maybe once a quarter for a week or two at a time. But if you're in some kind of an expected caregiving role, if you're closer in, some of that feedback can come across as like, hey, you didn't do a good job. We're not trying to say that, but sometimes that can come across. And I think grandparents need to be open enough to go, hey, there's changes, there's new things that are out there. I mean, screens. We didn't have, when my kids were growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s, like screen was like a flip phone that maybe you played basic games on.
Game Boy or something.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Not any of this like, an 18-month-old that knows how to work an iPad.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a perfect example of something that simply didn't exist when the parents were young parents. There are a lot of grandparents that even have possibly not the best, the healthiest relationship to screens.
Cynthia, what are some of the other challenges out there when grandparents are maybe expected to take more of an active babysitting role or even a daily daycare type role? What are some of the things, and let's talk about it from the parents' perspective, and then let's talk about some of the stickiness from the grandparents' perspective when that comes up.
When I was starting to take care of doing a little bit of childcare with my first grandchild, was minimal, was, picking up after daycare and having maybe one day with her, and it was wonderful. It was what I wanted to do. I had the time set aside for it. I enjoyed it, and I was very, very welcome to do it. That's kind of ideal because you can, as a grandparent, you can just be enjoying and learning and bonding without a lot of pressure. What can happen, and the studies have shown that, when grandparents are providing childcare on a voluntary basis, they want to do it, they have time to do it, they live nearby and they like doing it. It can be helpful for people's depression, which can happen in older ages. It can keep people more physically fit, and it can have a lot of positive impacts on older people's lives. But the opposite is true when grandparents are really expected or really needed to do an enormous amount of childcare or full-time childcare when they're either not really wanting to do that at this point in their life, or they're having some physical or other reasons why this is not what their expectation was of grandparenting. And so those are kind of two ends of the spectrum that can be seen in these families where grandparents do provide childcare.
Oh, sure.
And they can have different, really different impacts, because in part, every grandparent probably has some desire to really have time with their grandchild, but it can also become something that's very difficult and it's hard physically, or is fatiguing, and so it can be hard to share where you want to put that boundary around how much time you have.
And I think too is along those lines is having that expectation. What was great for grandma to help out with when the child was at preschool or before preschool is one thing, but grandma's getting older as this goes on, along with the grandchild. That age does factor in. Those little kids just seem to, their batteries amp up as they, keep aging. Ours tends to dwindle off a little bit. Yeah. And so even a year by year change can mean a lot.
It absolutely does. And, one of the factors there's a number of factors that come into a satisfying grandparent child care situation has to do with how close do the grandparents live nearby, how physically fit they are, and how much they want to spend with their grandchildren. And I think that even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you would hear more about young parents complaining about maybe the everyone loves Raymond type of grandma, right? Mm-hmm. In their always, either being interfering or controlling or domineering, having trouble maybe relating to their child's partner, having a difference in parenting styles or just wanting a lot of control. And now you also hear more about the opposite, that there is the expectation that the grandparents will want to be very involved with the grandchildren. And some grandparents just have a different vision of what grandparenthood is going to be, and it's not childcare. And so that can really, the discrepant visions of what it's going to be like when a grandchild enters a family, the parents' vision of what this grandparent's role is going to be, and the grandparents' vision of their own role, they can be very discrepant or discordant, and it can be tough getting them again in sync.
One of the things that where I've interviewed other grandfathers that live like in the same neighborhood down the street from the grandkids has been this idea that I've had being a long distance grandparent of what constitutes special grandpa time or what constitutes that. And I find that the grandparents that live close by, you don't really have that as much. Meaning, like when the grandchild comes to visit, well, grandpa and the grandchild, they always go to the A&W and they get a root beer and a cheeseburger. Yeah. And that's special grandpa grandchild time. When you're living in the same area, you kind of miss out on that. Not that you don't have some different moments, but you miss out. And I think as a grandparent, you always hear from other grandparents, what was that special thing you did? Oh, I picked up the granddaughter and we tried out, we found dresses for the doll, or we did this activity. We fed the ducks, whatever that is. And I know in the back of a lot of grandparents' minds, it's like, okay, well, that's the special, that's the fun part, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think that the description that you have of the full-time caregiving grandmother or grandfather, of course, the grandparents who have their the young parents are working and they have a lot of responsibility with the grandchildren. It's wonderful in a way, of course, because your grandchildren know you so well and you know them so well, and you're such an integral part of the family structure. The drawback is that those grandparents lose out on some of the role of a grandparent. They're more in a third parent role. They're in a working role, and in many cultures, that's the norm, right? That's the norm, that grandparents help raise grandchildren so that young parents can work all day, and it's very common in many cultures. And I think if your vision of, like, that's kind of what I want to do. I loved being a mom. I loved being a dad of little kids, and I love the school routines and I love the brushing the teeth and getting ready for bed and I love all that. That works can be tiring, but it's very rewarding. And for many, elders, maybe that's terrific. But for others, they kind of miss, like the way you described, those little special moments where you're really like a treasured grandparent that's kind of distinct from the everyday. Sure. And I think those grandparents do miss a little bit of that.
Yeah, and I would also think that that's one of the things that you probably talk about is making sure the parents know, hey, there needs to be some specialness in that relationship.
And it's both ways. I find that I've seen and counseled families where one or the other thing happens. The grandparent relates to the parents exclusively by discussing something about the children, so that your daughter-in-law or your son-in-law perhaps doesn't even seem to register in the grandparent mind. It's like you dive right through them and go right through, so push them aside as you walk in the door and focus on the grandchildren. And that can be a very kind of a bad habit to get into, because of how it makes parents feel that they're people too. And how about showing some interest in me and how I'm doing or what's new with me? And the reverse is also true, that some parents, and maybe they're very stressed and working and have a lot of really busy lives, they really call on their parents almost exclusively for, helping out with childcare. Can you pick up? Can you come over? Can you babysit? And so when anyone feels as though we're not really seen as having our own lives and our own individual interests and desires and needs, it cannot feel good. And when it doesn't feel good, things tend to, um, fall apart a little bit. So it's something for the parents and the grandparents to keep in mind, that everybody wants to feel that they have intrinsic value in the family, and not just the grandchildren are fabulous. But there's more people in the family.
Well said. I did want to ask you too, what are some of the tools and what are some of the things that you do to help get parents and grandparents maybe realigned on some of their communication?
Yeah. So when I was searching for resources for just that exact problem, I realized that when things are difficult to talk about interpersonally, tools are helpful. And if you have something that you can work with that can assist people in communication, that's what most of us need. Most of us could use some help in being able to communicate our needs, express our feelings without offending other people, without blame. And also, we all need a little bit of improvement in our own ability to understand others that are important to us and may have different perspective. So there's an organization called 0 to 3, which many grandparents may have heard about, and it's focused on all kinds of assistance for the adults who are either in families or work with children from 0 to age 3. It's a national organization, and I sought their resources on their site, and they have a tool that I found I couldn't find anything better to help caregiving grandparents who and the young parents, the grandparents and the parents communicate better with a tool where you really sit down and sort of fill out some forms and say, what's one thing that I do for that you really appreciate? And what if there was one thing that I could do better, what might that be? Or this is something that I love about your taking care of my grandchild. This is something that would help me enjoy it more, or I would feel this might be better for our family. So there are tools to help in a sort of unemotional way sit down and work through some of the things that are hard to talk about. But when you have a tool and you just fill it out and you sort of say, this isn't personal, this is something that we think is going to help our family thrive. Everybody really wants is family harmony. And once you improve communication, it just naturally follows that everyone feels a little better about everything.
I love sometimes using those diagnostic tools because they can also lend you or lead you into understanding other people's communication methods, other people's, how do they take things. We use these things at work sometimes, or I've used them in coaching, where you find out who likes to have chit chat, before you get into something, and then who's direct and to the point. So you may have that daughter-in-law or that son-in-law that they are 100% okay for you to show up, give a detailed report about what happened, and then good night and talk to you later.
Yeah.
And they're personality-wise, they're fine with that. So and those are examples, but those diagnostic tools really do help flush some of that out. And they also take out a little bit of the awkwardness around some of those
Well, they
conversations?
depersonalize it, which is what's helpful, because our egos are, I mean, we're all struggling to keep ourselves feeling okay about ourselves. This is just the human condition, right? Is that we want to feel that we're okay. And the tool, sort of sitting down and having a somewhat unemotional but meaningful discussion about things. It sounds easy, but it's actually really hard, and partially just because of the things you mentioned, is that we're all a little bit different. And one of the things that I would say, I don't think there's a grandparent around who hasn't heard about the zip the lip. That you're supposed to zip your lip and open your wallet, and then you'll have a wonderful relationship with your grandchildren. Well, my take on that is a little bit different, and it did come from the workplace. It was something called, when you have specific feedback. So you don't want to just zip your lip. You don't want to just walk around biting your tongue, and your daughter-in-law and your son know that you want to say something, but you don't. You're afraid to say it, or this whole thing that tells grandparents that they're just supposed to be quiet. And I think that young parents are so, especially new parents, are so much in need of reinforcement, validation, and affirmation, that grandparents opening their lips by giving specific and authentic feedback, because most grandparents can look at what's going on in their grandchild's house and say, oh my gosh, I never thought of doing that. I love the way they say it, right? Take the time to say, when you came in the door, you made it clear, even though you had a hard day, you made it clear that your daughter was the most important thing, and she felt it. So she always feels valued. Or say something positive about their bedtime routines, or how they set up the fact that they have dinner on a regular basis. These are things that you don't have to zip your lip, walk around zipping your lip. You can actually say positive things that you see, and you're bound to see them. It's not like you're making it up or trying to win points. It's just an important, young parents really are learning their job along the way, and they need that reinforcement that they're doing a good job. And I think that it's not unheard of to find ways to say that in a really positive way.
I love that you brought that up, because I find that in talking with other grandparents, and even seeing what's going on with my own daughter-in-laws, with social media and everything out there, there's so much that's hitting, especially young moms.
Yeah.
I think young dads tend to be oblivious, like most guys, about different things, but young women tend to really see, of course, whatever's getting posted is made up, lighted just right, everything else. Look at me. I just made this quilt this afternoon. I'm a wonderful mom. And, meanwhile, the mom of three's got, is fighting battles with the 5-year-old. The 3-year-old's got a runny nose, and the 18-month-old just threw up everywhere. Having that reinforcement coming from, whether it's a dad or a father-in-law or, grandma or mother-in-law, is huge to help at least put up a little bit of a wall that it's like, okay, they're doing all right.
Exactly. And when grandparents in their 60s and 70s, for example, I guess you would call boomers, right? Boomer grandparents, when they look, and I've seen this a lot, they look at their young families, their children, raising small children, and they just shake their head. Well, I don't know why this is all so hard for you. We didn't have this, and I didn't have that, and we just did this, and it was just, I don't know what are you worried about, right? And that is exactly what you don't say to people who are raising children today, because when I was raising my children in the early 80s, work was at work and home was home. And work rarely, unless you were an on-call person, you had a beeper, work was completely separated. And now it's not only is we're working from home, we're having to, have the children around at home, but it's also the invasiveness of email and texting and social media, so that for young parents today, they can't get away from this concept that people are watching. People are watching and judging them. And nobody in my generation knew what was going on in other people's homes. We didn't know what the bedroom looked like, what the living room looked like, what the clothes looked like. We just, unless we were best friends, we didn't know. But now, it's what's happening in social media for everyone. But for young parents, it's something that is very invasive, and it is a fundamental difference in the generations that causes anxiety, insecurity, and exhaustion. Really,
Yeah.
just exhausted.
And that's why, I come at this from the grandfathers, is getting that confirmation from them, letting the daughter-in-laws, in my case, I've got two daughter-in-laws. So that's my point of reference, is being able to go to them and go, man, when I come to visit, your house is always so clean. It's always so welcoming. And remember to do that. And I think some of that is, one, I kind of consider it good manners. Yeah. And then two, it's the thing is, I want a strong mom in that family for my grandkids. And that's how I get it, right?
Exactly. You're absolutely right. And, I have to talk to you about what I have to mention, your mentioning of good manners. Everybody who knows me knows that, that is a really important issue for me. Etiquette, manners, and teaching kids manners. And even if you're looking at it, I could apply the fact that all of these conflicts that kind of come up between family members, we're melding families with different cultures and possibly, and certainly different, whole different families, right? Your daughter-in-law, your son-in-laws from a different family, and they've got extended family members. They grew up differently. They had different things that were important to them. If you kind of just apply good manners to everything, just manners, then you don't speak rudely to each other. You think about how to word things in a way that is kind and compassionate. You put yourself, second in the well-being of another person. You don't always push your agenda. It's just good manners, right?
Sure.
And it goes a long way for. I can give a few examples where it goes a long way in family conflicts. Just apply manners and see how that works.
Yep. I do want to shift gears a little bit, Cynthia, and get your opinion on what you think of when people are talking about grandparenting. And I want to see if what grandparenting really includes with that phrase.
Yeah. I would say that whenever we read about grandparenting, we have to ask ourselves, except for you, cool grandpa, how many people are actually talking about just grandmothers and kind of excluding grandfathers? And why is that? Okay, well, if you were to look at the stats, probably more grandmothers provide, direct childcare to grandchildren than grandfathers on a statistical basis. But what's really underneath that? I mean, I think that the grandfathers today, the boomer grandfathers, probably had more experience being daddies, hands-on daddies, than their fathers did. But still, they might not have really known, everything about the dental appointments and some of the details that were kind of left maybe to the moms. But dads were really, really active. So these grandfathers today, had more experience parenting the people who are the parents now but they still might have felt that they were at work a little bit more, or maybe they didn't do as much as they would like to. And I think that what the family kind of notion about grandfathers that can arise is that grandfathers are fun, goofy, just for fun, or you ask them for financial support, and that's kind of the two categories you put them in, because um, a lot of grandfathers have been, you could say, nudged out. They might have been nudged out of childcare giving when their own children were babies, and so they're thought that they really can't do that work with their grandchildren. But all it takes is a little education and a little effort, because a lot of men, older men, have time in their day to do this kind of activity, and a strong desire to do it, because there are many things, that grandfathers would like to impart to their grandchildren, things they'd like to teach them, wisdom they'd like to pass on, as well as having, goofy fun with them. And you don't, if the grandfather can transition from perhaps a role where he was very much in the head of household type of decision making process, and really relinquish some of that role of being in a very decision making role, and just kind of relaxing and letting the young people do the hard work, and he can really enjoy playing with and taking care of the children. He wants to feel trusted, and he wants to feel that he's got a place in the family that's not just supporting them financially or helping them financially.
I'm glad to hear you say all that, because I think in talking with people about this role is like, hey, grandfathers are more than just a wallet and a checkbook at birthdays. And so I'm glad that we're seeing this start to evolve a little bit around the boomers and then Generation X. And I think, too, as we start to see more and more businesses and opportunities for paternity care after babies come, right? Now, this is going to be obviously another 20, 30 years down the road before we see what actually happens. But starting to at least get some of that recognition of the importance of fathers, one, and then grandfathers, two, is huge. And
I think one of the things, too, is as we talk about the grandfathers and talk about fathers and talk about grandparents in general, is you really want to just open the communication and ask your dad, hey, Dad, would you like to she's only 5 months old. Would you like to hang out with her today? Because you might have to feed her or change diaper. How do you feel about that? Ask more questions of each other, and, don't make assumptions. Ask what your children need as help. For the young parents, ask the grandparents what kind of role they want. Just so simple, right?
Yeah. But I love it, because I think, too, as we're going through, let's say, generational societal change in kind of the expectations and the roles around this, I think sometimes, to your earlier point, when grandmas really are assertive and really are leading the charge in all this, I think sometimes if grandmas and the parents, if you invite grandpa in, and because maybe he's been laying back thinking like, well, I'm not really needed to watch the 5-month-old. But if you go, hey, are you comfortable changing diapers? Or are you comfortable putting them down at 2:00 for their nap?
Offer to teach them. You might be surprised what they'd like to do.
Oh, sure. I think that's great. It's a great way to invite them into that family. And then if honestly, if they say no, they say no. And then at least at that point, right? You're not making those further assumptions.
Right. And as you say, grandchildren grow quickly. So you're not into 5-month-olds. Are you into 18-month-olds? You're not into 18-month-old? How about now they can walk and talk and catch a ball? So there are different entrance points for, shifting grandparent relationships.
Cynthia, I've had you on for a while. Is there anything about this parent-grandparent communication that I hadn't brought up or we haven't touched on that you would like to bring up?
Well, I would just say I always try to help three key messages. Number one is I always say, ask how you can help, right? So ask questions, don't make assumptions. Ask the young families what they need from you as a grandparent. The second key message is, keep the focus on the grandchild, because we are, as grown-ups, we are very self-centered. We think everything, somehow this is how it feels to me, and you should hear my opinion, and I have this feeling. Well, as a grandparent, you're most successful as a grandparent when you really accept and manage this transition into being a secondary decision maker in the family life. You're not primary anymore, and that's okay. You had your chance, now it's their turn, right? So don't make anything about you. Just think about what's best for the grandchild, and then the third thing is to be a role model. One of the gifts of age is that we have experience, we do have some wisdom, and we can have grace and dignity by sort of standing by our children who are now young parents and offering to be their assistant, their helper, their supporter, and just being, the wise elder in the family, and really thinking about how you want to be remembered years from now. You want to be remembered as someone who enhanced family life and contributed to the upbringing, what contributed to your grandchildren's personalities in a positive way. And if you keep those things in mind, it helps guide each one of your interactions.
Oh, that's well said. So, Cynthia, how can people get connected with you and it's their turn? What's the best way for them to reach out for more information?
I would love people to, just email me at cynthia@itstheirturn.com. That's usually the best way. I check email frequently. I have a blog, and I'd love to have additional subscribers. I do Zoom private counseling for local people who are local to me. We can do in person. And I also run grandparent meetups that are super popular. And I'm teaching a local grandparenting class. So there's lots of ways to find me. And I know you've had Dee Dee Moore on, who is my mentor and idol.
Yes.
Morethangrand.com. I have been, and my life has been enhanced by my acquaintance with Dee Dee, and I've been honored to be the advice columnist for her website. It's called Grand Advice, and it's real questions from grandparents and young parents that we answer in real time. So it's in addition to her blog, which is fabulous, and her new Grandparent Essentials is an amazing resource for new grandparents. So I'm a huge fan of hers. She has, we do different things, but we certainly love our connection.
Oh, yes. Absolutely love Dee Dee and have had her on, I think, a couple of times. But yeah, her new Parent Essentials and the different workbooks and the different things that she has over there to support parents and grandparents is absolutely fantastic. And she's not afraid to tackle tough subject matter. She dives in.
And we are, I just see eye to eye with her on so many of things. It's been great getting to know her, and I really love working on the advice columns, because it's great to it's great to hear from actual people that are following her on Instagram or submitting questions through her website, because they're quite often they're really classic questions that come up for lots and lots of families. So it's a great resource.
Oh, sure. And folks, if you're out driving around, you're out walking the dog, whatever you're doing, what I'll do is put links to everything that we're talking about into the show notes. so that you can get connected with Cynthia. I'll have her email there. I'll have the links to It's Their Turn. I'll have links to Dee Dee's site, More Than Grand. All that stuff is there. It'll be nice and easy. So, you don't have to stop the car, pull over, and write any of this down. It'll be at cool-grandpa.us. Mm-hmm. Cynthia, it has been an absolute enjoyment to have you on and talk about the communication and some of the pitfalls and some of the opportunities that parents and grandparents can enjoy on this journey with their grandchildren.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
And I look forward to hearing more of your podcasts. I really enjoy your show.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Cynthia. I know I did. I really liked hearing her journey from being a genetic counselor into what she's doing now with It's Their Turn. I appreciate people that take time and take effort and energies to make sure that grandparents and parents get on the same page when it comes to raising their grandchildren. Now, what I especially want to make sure that I remind you of is I've got links in the show notes to It's Their Turn, as well as links for More Than Grand and a number of the articles and blogs that Cynthia has written in support of grandparents. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I really encourage you to go check out It's Their Turn and connect with Cynthia. Find out where maybe some of these grandparent meetups are happening that she's helping to facilitate. And until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.